At my son-in-law's funeral, before the casket was even closed, my daughter stood in front of everyone and said, "My husband's death wasn't an accident. My father is responsible." In one sentence, I stopped being a grieving man and became someone the room was ready to destroy. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. My name is Michael Harris, and until that moment, I thought I understood silence. I was wrong. The silence that followed my daughter's words wasn't respectful. It wasn't mourning. It was judgment. It spread across the church like a stain, soaking into every face turned in my direction. People didn't move. They didn't breathe. They just stared, waiting to see what kind of man I really was. My daughter stood there, hands trembling just enough to look human, but not enough to look uncertain. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't need to. Her voice had already done the damage. 10 feet away, my son-in-law lay in a polished casket, the kind chosen to show love after it's too late. 34 years old. 2 children who still believed their father might wake up if they waited long enough. And somehow in that moment, his death became my crime. I wanted to speak. God knows I did. I wanted to say her name, Emily, and remind her that I was still standing right there, that I was still her father. But I didn't open my mouth, because once an accusation is made in public, the truth doesn't come out first. Survival does. I felt it instantly, the shift in the room, the quiet recalculation happening behind people's eyes. The same people who had shaken my hand minutes earlier were now replaying her words, fitting them into stories they didn't yet understand, but were already willing to believe. The pastor cleared his throat, then stopped. Even he knew this wasn't something prayer could interrupt. Emily finally looked at me, not with anger, not with grief, with something colder, like she'd already buried me alongside her husband. "You know what you did?" she said. She didn't explain. She didn't have to. Ambiguity is a weapon when you aim it at the right crowd. This didn't begin with her husband's death. That's the part no one in that church could see. It began years earlier, the day Emily married a man named Ryan, a man who smiled easily, talked fast, and believed rules were suggestions meant for other people. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't abusive. He was reckless in a way that hides behind charm. I saw it early. Fathers usually do. I warned him. Not loudly, not publicly. Man to man. I told him there were shortcuts that don't just cost money, that some doors don't close quietly once you open them. I told him to walk away while he still could. Emily didn't hear concern. She heard control. She told me to stay out of her marriage. I did. Or at least, I thought I had. At the funeral, all of that history collapsed into a single sentence that painted me as something monstrous. And once that picture formed, it didn't matter what I said next. After the service, no one asked if I was okay. They gathered around Emily instead, hands on her back, whispers of support, looks in my direction that slid away too fast to be accidental. I didn't attend the reception. I drove home alone, the radio off, the weight of the day pressing against my chest like something physical. By the time I walked through my front door, my phone was already buzzing. Missed calls. Messages that started kind and ended careful. One from a longtime friend read, "If there's something I should know, I'd rather hear it from you." That's when it hit me. This wasn't grief. This was punishment. And Emily had chosen the one place I could never fight back, a funeral, where silence looks like guilt and defense looks like disrespect. At a funeral, the dead don't get a second chance, and neither does the man accused of killing them. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table long after the sun went down, the house quiet in a way it never had been when Emily was growing up. No footsteps on the stairs, no music leaking from a bedroom, just the low hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of a clock that suddenly felt too loud, like it was counting something down. My phone lay face down in front of me. Every few minutes, it vibrated anyway. By morning, I didn't need to check the screen to know what was happening. The story had already escaped me. It always does. Once an accusation is spoken in public, it doesn't stay where it started. It travels. It changes shape. It grows teeth. I stepped outside to get the paper, and for the first time in 20 years, my neighbor across the street didn't wave. She looked at me, hesitated, then pretended to adjust her mailbox instead. That's when I understood something important. People weren't waiting to hear my side. They were waiting to decide what kind of man I was. The first call I answered came from my ex-wife, Laura. Her voice was careful, like she was walking through a room full of glass. "She's devastated," she said. "So am I replied. There was a pause, not a long one, just long enough to let me know she didn't agree. "This isn't about you right now, Michael," she said. I didn't argue. There was no point. The roles had already been assigned. Emily was the grieving widow. I was the background problem no one wanted to look at too closely. By midday, a local reporter left a voicemail asking if I'd be willing to comment on statements made during yesterday's funeral service. Statements. Plural. As if there had been a list of them, not a single sentence designed to land like a grenade. I didn't call back. Instead, I called Emily. Straight to voicemail. I texted her one line. Nothing defensive, nothing emotional. "We need to talk." No response. What I did get, an hour later, was a call from Ryan's cousin. A man I'd spoken to maybe 3 times in my life. He didn't accuse me outright. He asked questions that already assumed an answer. "Did you ever pressure him about that situation?" he asked. "What situation?" I said. Silence. "I guess we'll find out," he replied, and hung up. That was the moment I realized Emily hadn't just blamed me for Ryan's death. She'd given people permission to imagine whatever version of me fit their anger best. By late afternoon, my lawyer called. Not because I'd reached out, because someone else had. "There's chatter," he said. "Nothing official yet, but enough that you should be very careful about what you say and to whom." I asked him the question that had been circling my mind all day. "What exactly am I being accused of?" He hesitated. That hesitation told me more than his answer. "Influence," he finally said. "Pressure. The suggestion that your involvement contributed to choices Ryan made before his death." It was vague. That was intentional. Vagueness is how accusations survive long enough to harden. After we hung up, I went out to the garage and unlocked the old metal cabinet I'd kept out of habit more than fear. Inside were folders I hadn't touched in years, printed emails, handwritten notes, copies of things I never imagined I'd need again. At the bottom was my old phone, 3 years old, dead battery, a different life. I charged it and waited while it powered on slowly, like it resented being dragged back into the present. Notifications flooded the screen, missed calls from numbers I barely recognized anymore. And then I saw it. One voicemail, left 2 weeks before Ryan died. I stared at it for a long time without pressing play. Back then, it had felt private, a man admitting fear to someone he didn't know how to face. I'd saved it without thinking much about why. Maybe instinct, maybe habit. Now it felt dangerous. I didn't listen to it yet. Instead, I sat on the concrete floor and thought about Emily's timing. If this had been grief, she would have confronted me in private. If it had been anger, she would have exploded. But she chose the funeral, the audience, the moment when I couldn't interrupt her without looking guilty. That wasn't emotion. That was intention. The next morning, the police called. Friendly. Casual. "Just a few questions," they said, like they were offering coffee. I agreed to meet. The room was small and windowless. 2 officers, neutral expressions, voices trained to sound open even when their minds weren't. They asked me to describe my relationship with Ryan. I told them the truth, slowly, carefully, how I'd worried about him, how I'd warned him away from something he didn't fully understand, how I'd backed off when Emily told me to. "Did you ever threaten him?" one of them asked. "No," I said. "Did you ever imply there would be consequences if he didn't listen to you?" I thought about that for a moment, about how easily words can be twisted once someone wants them to be. "I expressed concern," I said. "That's all." They wrote it down, not skeptically, not reassuringly either. When I left, I knew the balance had shifted. They weren't convinced, but they weren't finished. That night, Emily posted something online. Not an accusation, not a denial, just one sentence. Some truths are hard to say out loud, but silence hurts more. It spread faster than anything she could have said directly. Comments flooded in. Support, anger, speculation, people connecting dots they didn't have, answering questions no one had asked yet. Every time someone wondered what I'd done, someone else filled in the blank for them. I watched it all happen, feeling like I was standing outside my own life, watching a version of myself take shape without my permission. That was when I understood the real danger. Emily didn't need to prove I was guilty. She just needed to make sure no one ever fully believed I was innocent. I went back into the garage and sat there again, phone in my hand, staring at that voicemail. If I used it, there would be no going back. If I didn't, I would slowly disappear under a story I didn't write. I pressed play for just a second, long enough to hear Ryan's voice crack as he spoke my name. Then I stopped it. Not yet, I told myself, because once the truth comes out, it doesn't just clear your name. It destroys something else, and I needed to be absolutely sure what Emily was willing to lose. I knew Emily was going to speak again before anyone told me. You get a sense for those things when your life is no longer yours. The calls come earlier. People stop asking how you're holding up and start asking what you're going to do. My lawyer called just after 7 in the morning and didn't bother easing into it. She's agreed to an interview, he said. National. I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat there for a long time, staring at the same spot on the wall, thinking about how strange it was that my own daughter now needed cameras and lighting to talk around me instead of a kitchen table to talk to me. The interview aired that night. I didn't turn the television on right away. I waited until the exact minute it was scheduled to start. Not because I wanted to hear her voice, but because I wanted to hear what she'd say, knowing the entire country was listening. She looked smaller on screen, pale, wrapped in something soft and neutral, the kind of outfit chosen to signal vulnerability without saying it out loud. The host spoke gently, like he was afraid she might break. Emily talked about grief, about confusion, about how losing her husband felt like losing the ground beneath her feet. Everything she said was true enough to be believable and incomplete enough to be dangerous. Then she started circling me. She didn't say my name at first. She talked about pressure, about growing up under expectations, about men who don't know when to step back. Each sentence landed where it was supposed to. The audience didn't need instructions. They knew who she meant. Halfway through, she described a conversation she claimed happened 3 months before Ryan died. She said I told him that if he didn't walk away from a certain situation, people would get hurt. I felt my body lean forward before my mind caught up, because that sentence didn't exist, not in my words, not in my tone, and more importantly, it didn't match what she'd told the police. I rewound it, played it again, slower this time. There it was again. Clean, confident, wrong. That was the crack. Small, but real. When a story is built on emotion, consistency is the first thing it sacrifices. And once a detail shifts, everything connected to it starts to wobble. I didn't call Emily. I didn't post a response. I didn't rush to defend myself. That's what people expect a guilty man to do. Instead, I did what I've always done when things turn serious. I prepared. Over the next several days, my lawyer and I went through everything. Emails showing I'd warned Ryan to stay away from what Emily now claimed I pushed him into. Messages from Emily herself, telling me to stop interfering, telling me she'd handle it, telling me I was overreacting. Each piece alone meant nothing. Together, they formed a pattern. And then there was the voicemail. We listened to it in his office. The door closed, the room quiet, except for Ryan's voice coming through the speaker. He sounded nervous, unsteady. Nothing like the confident version people remembered from social media. He talked about mistakes, about hiding things from Emily, about being afraid she'd need someone to blame if the truth ever came out. At one point, he said my name, not with anger, with relief. When it ended, my lawyer didn't speak right away. He just sat there, hands folded, eyes down. When he finally looked up, his expression had changed. "This doesn't just defend you," he said. "It contradicts her." That was the moment I decided to stop waiting. We didn't leak it. We didn't tease it. We submitted it formally, along with the emails, the timelines, the discrepancies between her statements. Everything clean, everything documented. At first, nothing happened. People resist new information when it threatens something they've already emotionally invested in. It's easier to double down than to admit you might have been wrong. But doubt has a way of moving quietly. A legal analyst mentioned the voicemail during a late-night segment, not accusing Emily, just asking why it hadn't surfaced earlier. Another commentator pointed out inconsistencies between her interview and the police report. The tone shifted, not dramatically, but noticeably. Emily went silent. That silence didn't read as strength anymore. It read as panic. 3 days later, the voicemail aired in full. No dramatic music, no narration. Just Ryan's voice, uncut, unframed, left to stand on its own. I didn't watch it live. I didn't need to. My phone told the story for me. Messages started coming in from people who hadn't spoken to me in weeks. Some were careful. Some were awkward. A few were honest. I didn't know. This changes things. I think we owe you an apology. No one said they were wrong. They never do. Emily broke her silence the next morning with a long post online. It was angry, defensive, full of words like manipulation and timing, and one detail mattered more than everything else. She stopped saying I caused Ryan's death. She started saying I controlled the narrative. That's what people say when they can't deny the facts anymore. The police called again later that day. Same voices, different tone. They asked follow-up questions that assumed answers instead of suspicion. When I hung up, I felt something settle inside me for the first time since the funeral. Not relief, control. I didn't enjoy watching her credibility unravel. She was still my daughter. But I understood something she hadn't considered. She made this public, which meant the truth would be public too. And once that door opens, it doesn't close quietly. It swings. Hard, the public doesn't turn all at once. It tilts, slowly, quietly, almost politely, one question at a time. The week after the voicemail aired, Emily's interviews started showing up again, not as sympathy pieces, but as clips, short ones, paused at the exact moments where her words didn't line up anymore. Analysts didn't accuse her. They didn't need to. They just played her sentences back to back and let the silence between them do the work. Silence is brutal when it's no longer on your side. She tried to regain control with another statement, this one carefully written, reviewed, edited. It talked about grief again, about trauma, about how people say things they don't fully mean when they're in pain. But she never said my name. That mattered. Because once you accuse someone directly and then stop, people notice the absence more than the words. Then came the hearing. Not a trial. Not yet. Just a formal proceeding to determine whether there was enough to move forward. The room was full in a way funerals usually are. Quiet, heavy, observant. Emily sat across from me, eyes fixed forward. She didn't look at me once. I didn't look at her either. My lawyer laid everything out without emotion. The emails, the timestamps, the voicemail, the contradictions. Not as a story, but as a sequence. One thing leading naturally to the next. When Emily's attorney spoke, he leaned hard on feelings, on how grief distorts memory, on how pressure can exist without intention, on how power dynamics between parents and children can be complicated. It might have worked if Emily hadn't already gone public, because once you choose a definitive version of events in front of millions, you don't get to retreat into ambiguity later. You don't get to say, I'm not sure, after you've already said, I know. The decision came 2 days later. No charges. No findings of wrongdoing. Just a clean, careful statement from the district attorney saying there was no evidence supporting claims of coercion or responsibility. It was enough. By that evening, headlines had changed tone completely. Words like allegation and claim were replaced with retracted, unsubstantiated, contradicted. Emily's name was still there, but now it was attached to questions instead of certainty. She lost her job the following week, not officially because of the story. Officially, it was internal restructuring. Unofficially, sponsors don't like controversy they can't predict, and employers don't like employees whose credibility has become a public debate. People she once stood beside started stepping away. Slowly, carefully. No dramatic exits. Just distance. That's how reputation dies in real life. Not with explosions, with empty space. She called me one night, for the first time since the funeral. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Her voice was tired, flat, stripped of performance. I didn't think it would go this far, she said. I didn't respond right away. I was listening for something specific. It never came. No apology. No acknowledgement of what she'd done. Just regret that the outcome hadn't favored her. I warned you, I said finally, not angrily, just truthfully. I asked you to talk to me. You chose an audience instead. She started crying then. Real crying this time, I think. The kind that doesn't care who's watching. I lost everything, she said. I closed my eyes. No, I replied. You lost control. There's a difference. We didn't speak after that. Maybe we never will again. I don't know. Some things don't heal. They just scar and become part of the shape of your life. The world moved on like it always does. Another story replaced ours. Another villain. Another victim. That's the economy of attention. But my name stayed clean. And that was the point. Not revenge for the sake of cruelty. Not punishment for the sake of pride. Just balance. Just the truth standing where a lie had tried to. People ask me now if I regret letting it play out publicly. I tell them no. Because when someone is willing to destroy you in front of everyone, quietly saving yourself isn't enough. You have to be seen standing. You have to let the truth walk all the way into the room, unescorted, and speak for itself. And if that truth costs someone their mask, their authority, their carefully built image, that's not revenge, that's consequence. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. Thank you for watching.